Conflict resolution for healthy communities. We're hoping that we'll dig in a little bit to the origins of conflict, to what's to understanding conflict better and understanding our reactions to it. I'm Samantha Veneruso, Sam Veneruso, and I am really excited to be here to do this. And Theresa is my wonderful partner in crime with all of this, and so I will let her kick off her introduction.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Theresa Destrebecq. Many of you know me already. I am a professional facilitator, mostly working within large to mid-sized organizations. And Sam, during our MYFest brainstorm at the beginning, before MYFest had started, she's like, I really want to do something around conflict. And I was like, I'll do it. You know, I love conflict, but I don't love conflict. Like, I don't love the conflict, but I love opening space to like talk about conflict and how we can do conflict better, I guess, if that's the way. So Sam and I have been planning this together, and we've kind of called it a friction lab because conflict always brings about friction. So I'm excited to be here. And with that, I think we can get started. So we're not going to do a regular check-in. We're actually going to do a short guided practice. So I'm going to invite you to, if you want to put anything down, lean back if you want to. And if you feel comfortable, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. And if you don't want to close your eyes, my invitation would be for you to just lower your gaze so you don't get distracted by any movement on the screen. And we're just going to get ourselves a little grounded and settled. So let's take a couple of deep breaths together. So a nice slow inhale. And then pause at the top of your inhale. And then blow out slowly, as if you're blowing out through a straw, really slowly. You're trying to make those tiny little bubbles. And then just do two more like that at your own pace. And when you finish those breaths, hopefully you feel a little bit more grounded, a little bit more settled in your space. So now just to let your breath breathe itself. It's one of the wonderful things about breath is we can think about it or we cannot, and it still does its thing. So I'm going to invite you to bring to mind or to feel a space where you feel cozy, where you feel safe, where you feel at ease, where you don't feel any friction or conflict. So it could be a space in your home, it could be a space outdoors, it could be a space in your mind, an imaginary space, like, oh, I know I would feel really cozy, like, I don't know, in a plush pillow somewhere, but I don't have a plush pillow, so. And as you hang out in this space, I invite you to feel whatever it is around you. So what are you sitting on? Maybe reach out and touch some things. Just have a sensory experience. And then I invite you into your sense of smell. Are there any smells that really make you feel calm, cozy, safe? Maybe it's fresh baked cookies. Maybe it's cut grass, evergreen trees like that are behind Ken. Just imagine those smells. And is there anything you hear in this space? Maybe it's the whirl of the air conditioning. Oh, it's not going to be too hot today. Maybe it's birds. Maybe it's the sound of silence. And then finally, I invite you to look around in this space in your mind's eye. Those of you who have that ability, and take notice of what it is you see in this space. It's almost like a sanctuary, if you will. And if there's anything missing, even if it feels out of place, use the magic of your mind and bring it in. What is this teddy bear doing in the middle of the forest? Doesn't matter. As long as it makes you feel safe and cozy, friction-free. As you sit in this space and enjoy this space, I invite you to think about, or not even think about, but pay attention to what's happening in your body. Do a quick body scan, starting at your toes, slowly moving up your legs. And just notice and name, oh gosh, I don't really feel anything. Maybe that tension that I was feeling in my hips, I don't really feel it anymore. Slowly make your way up your body. Just notice and name any sensations. And when you get into your headspace, think about what you're thinking about. What do you notice is happening in your mind? What thoughts are coming and going? Are there any feelings that your thoughts have attached to? Oh gosh, this feels easy. This feels good. What labels have you put on those sensations or those feelings? Now that we know the sense of safety, we're going to enter into a space of conflict. So imagine that you have one of those old TVs in front of you that has a knob. And I invite you, if you want to reach out and turn the knob of this TV. And you're going to wipe away that sanctuary you just built. And you're going to enter into a recent conflict that you've had. This could be a conflict within yourself, could be a conflict with a person, could be a conflict with an unnamed, unseen body. Preferably a conflict that's like mid-range, not something that really amps you up too much. Nothing that will re-traumatize you. An everyday conflict. And as you bring this conflict to mind, perhaps see the issue, see the person, reread whatever it did that really got you into conflict. And from this space, I invite you to think about what's happening in your mind at this moment. What are the thoughts that are swirling? Are there judgments? Are there accusations? Is there a competitive edge? So what's there in your thoughts? What feelings arise as you think about and bring to mind this conflict? Is there frustration? Is there resentment? Is there anger? Is there fatigue? Oh, gosh, I just want this to be done. And then finally, I invite you to think back to your body. Do another body scan and notice if there's been a shift, starting at your toes, moving up through the various parts of your body. Are there any physical sensations that have arisen in you as you think about this conflict, this friction? And lastly, I'm going to invite you to reach out again. I'm not going to hang out here too long. We're going to turn the dial back to your sanctuary. So you erase that conflict from your mind and bring back your sanctuary, your safe space, your cozy place. Reconnect with whatever it was you were feeling or seeing or hearing or smelling. And then when you feel ready, I'm going to invite you to open your eyes. But rather than look directly at the screen, I'm going to invite you to look up to the left and up to the right before finally coming back to the screen with us. Welcome back. So we're going to invite you to take a couple of moments right now to reflect on what were those body sensations and feelings that came up for you around this specific conflict. And if you want to, you can also write down and jot down a few of the things like, oh gosh, in my sanctuary, I felt this, but in this conflict, I felt this. And we're going to be using this particular everyday conflict later on as well. So can we just take 2 or 3 minutes? Maybe 2 minutes?
Yeah, about 2.
2 minutes. And Verona, by the way, welcome. You came in while my eyes were closed. Does everybody have something down? It doesn't have to be articulate. It doesn't have to be in complete sentences. Just a noticing. So what we're going to do is we're going to send you into breakout rooms for a very quick 4 minutes. There'll be 3 of you in each group. So if anyone has any
Two.
tech issues.
Oh, I can change it. I put 2 in every group.
2 in a room? Okay.
Yeah. Well, except for one.
Okay.
There's one that with 4.
Okay. Well, then we'll just leave it. Just leave it how you did.
Okay.
So we'll just take a quick 4 minutes and share what came up for you in your body, in your thoughts, in your feelings when you thought about this conflict, where you brought to mind this conflict. And Sam is setting up the breakout rooms.
Oh, okay. Oh. Sorry, Danny. I'm going to move Yasser to A2.
Shahinaz, I don't know if you need to push a button that says join. I'm not sure.
We should have asked if there was anybody who didn't want to go to a room.
Yep. Or did a quiet room.
Yep. We'll just mention it when I'll mention it when they come back.
Okay.
Are we worried about time?
Yeah, we're already a little bit behind schedule.
I mean, we were supposed to be 5 minutes behind schedule to start at 5 minutes late, but it's
yeah.
more than that.
So I think the origins of conflict, I think the group conversations, we have 15 minutes. I think we could potentially, we can just give them 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think that's fine. And then I don't know how long your origins of conflict will start. I mean, you have 3 slide decks, 3 slides. So the only thing with the slides, I realized I didn't do alt text for my slides.
I did put alt text on mine.
I did not.
I did, but it's not like everything. So I'll still sort of go through it, but.
Okay, I'll just quickly do a little.
Yeah, you should be able to. I didn't put one on. Can you put one on the Thomas Kilman model?
Yeah. Yep.
Of course, all of that was just recorded.
That's okay.
Okay, we're going to give them like 1 more minute, 2 more minutes, 2 more minutes.
Yep. I guess we can pause the.
Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the origins of conflict, the frameworks for thinking about it, that may help us sort of engage and lean into conflict as a generative thing as opposed to a negative thing, at least for ourselves, to be able maybe to distance from some of the more unpleasant sensations that conflict can often bring up to us. So I'm going to share a couple slides. Most of this is not a slide presentation, but I am going to share a couple things just to help us sort of think through what we're doing. It's going to give me a second to get my portion of my screen here. Maybe make it a little bigger, maybe. Okay. Not there yet. Okay, there we go. Hopefully you can see a portion of my screen. You should see a slide with several interlapping circles. And the idea is that these things sort of all overlap with each other. And each sort of section or place that conflict might come from is reflected in these, but they don't necessarily exist in a vacuum or by themselves. So the first one is really like a goal conflict, and this idea that we may have different goals. And if we haven't really talked about those goals, or if we're pursuing those different goals, those goals might be in conflict, and that might be where our conflict is stemming from. We might be having a cognitive conflict, sort of this idea that our ideas or our opinions are different, and we can't find a place of sameness, or of at least not necessarily sameness, but of agreement, or we find somebody else's ideas or opinions threatening, or scary, or in some way problematic for us. We have affective conflict, which is where two people just don't get along, or there's behavioral questions. And then there's also a behavioral conflict where a person or a group acts in a certain way, and another group acts in another way, and that those behaviors are in conflict. So that's one set of what, or one way to frame conflict or to think about conflict. But it's more complicated than that as well, because again, there's lots of different types of conflict. Another way to maybe think about conflict is here. And in this image, we have, four sort of related areas that we're talking about, and they may be role dissatisfaction. In other words, you are in a particular role. It's not a role that you want to have. And so you're dissatisfied, and you want to do more, have more responsibility, be more involved, have more expectation, or have more authority or power or control. There's intergroup conflict, which is really, I sometimes like to think of it as like jurisdictional ambiguity. Who's responsible for what? Who owns what? So two groups both feel that they own something, whether it's an intellectual thing or a physical thing or whatever. And there's conflict because it's not clear who's actually responsible, and that can lead into conflicts that are difficult to resolve. Sometimes there's overlapping responsibility. I think we see that in academia a lot, where there's overlapping responsibility for things, and different people want to say this is how it should be done, and people aren't satisfied with the idea of like, no, that's my responsibility. I think there's interpersonal, again, back to that sort of interpersonal thing, that there's just differences in personality, or how when our tasks are related and we have different ways of completing those tasks, and we're not comfortable with those kinds of things. We have style differences. We have differences in background. Competition for resources. When resources are scarce, conflict can also come up out of, well, wait, no, I want this. This time is mine. I want this money, these physical assets, these physical resources, or even the recognition. So I want to be recognized for the work that I'm doing, for the authority that I have, for the expertise that I have, or any of those kinds of things. So resource competition can be an origin of conflict. And then, as we talked about, the role dissatisfaction. But if you scope out from those a little bit, each of these things, all of these things, is grounded in who has power over something, who has control over something, or in the people that are engaged or involved in that particular situation. So whether it's that role dissatisfaction, that could be about power or control. It could be about, if we're talking about an interpersonal conflict, it's about differences of the way we behave, the way we engage in the world, and we haven't necessarily figured out ways to bring those things together. And then, if we go out even further, there's sort of this idea of like, how do we respond to those things, which can then, push us further into a conflict. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But we get into places where we emotionally avoid what's happening. We just withdraw and we pull out, and we just start doing things in our own direction. And so that's another source of sort of the conflict. Why aren't you here? Why aren't you here working with me, doing this with me? Sometimes in conflict, we indulge emotionally. The idea of venting about something, or gossiping, or talking about something, it actually neurologically feels good in our brain when we do that, to have those kinds of things. When we pull people to our side, we gather people, and that can create even more conflict. And then we also often operate out of hurt, and I'm going to put hurt and anger kind of in that same place. We're hurt because our needs aren't being recognized, or we're angry because our needs aren't being recognized, and those things sort of come together. So that sort of leads us to this idea of how do we recognize or see unresolved conflict. On the left side of the screen, we have the conflict escalation tornado. And that's really when, if we can't interrupt this tornado, then we move up to the worst place of mutual self-destruction, where we are so lost in the conflict that the origins of it, the solutions for it, what's there is no longer even really relevant to us, because it's really the conflict has taken over whatever the start was. So, using and thinking about frameworks and thinking about the conflict sort of, and yes, some of it is intellectualizing the conflict, separating the emotional side from it, understanding where everybody is, what their stance is in that conflict, where they are, can help us. It doesn't always resolve the original origin of it, but if we can interrupt it, and if we can take strategies, and that's kind of where we're going to get to after our next little segment of talking together, we can break out of this cycle. And so this cycle, starting at cooperation, we get to competition, and then we start assuming, well, okay, wait, that person's competing against me, or that person's competing for this thing. Now we're going to start assuming things about that person. We're going to assume that they're intentionally trying to harm us. We go out, we then try to find support for our side of things, and then we rely on we start telling stories to ourselves about how things are and why they're happening the way they are. We start relying on assumptions that we make. Then we go into groupthink. Then our beliefs our beliefs about what's happening, whether those are true or not true, our beliefs about them feed into our observations, which then, takes us all the way continuing into really negative spaces. And so I think part of resolving conflicts is stepping back from that and recognizing where you are and where you're feeling, and then trying to interrupt that cycle of storytelling and beliefs, and finding healthier way to sort of resolve those kinds of things. I see a chat. Veronica, thank you. I'm in the photo and I don't like it. Did you want to talk about that, Veronica? Did you want to jump in with something there?
No, this just all sounds incredibly familiar. It's interesting to see it laid out in such well formatted and comprehensive manner.
Okay, good. I'm glad. I mean, if I'm going through it relatively quickly, we could dig into each of these spaces and each of these things. But I do think when we look at this and when we think about this, when we think about those origins, it makes sense. But we often get caught up in how we feel in the middle of it. And we get caught up in our physical sensations, because it is a physical, because a physical kind of response, that is our response to feeling defensive, to feeling like we're being attacked, to feeling, these kinds of things. This is, a cycle that happens. It's a natural physiological thing, but there are ways to sort of interrupt it. And there are ways to recognize that what's happening, and there are ways to step aside from it. And I think the core thing I would say is that, the only thing we can really control is ourselves, and how we respond to it, and how we think about it, and how we frame it. Maha, I appreciate your comment about the groupthink. I think with the groupthink, what it is we often have a resonance of, even when we're in a one-on-one conflict, where we go out and we try to recruit people to our side. We're venting, we're talking about it. We're like, isn't this horrible? Look at this terrible thing that's happening. It's absolutely horrible. And so even if it's a one-on-one conflict, that groupthink happens when we're looking for support, or we're looking for people to agree with us, or to make us feel better about what's happening. The problem is that conflict, when it's not resolved, takes us to places of, sort of gossiping and sarcasm, these sort of passive aggressive behaviors, which is, going out and pulling people together to get support for your side. It can be stonewalling where we're like, oh, nope, okay, fine. You didn't want to hear about it. I'm just going to sit here and I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to be part of this conversation. I'm pulling myself out. And I'm not going to give you the information you need because, we're in conflict. It can go to exaggerating, turning things into much bigger things than they necessarily need to be. I do. I agree with you, Veronica. The "Am I a Jerk" Reddit thread is fascinating experience. And it's really funny because when you're reading those and you're kind of on the outside, you're like, I'm only hearing one side of this actual conflict. Is this really actually true? I mean, if this is really true, that's terrible. But like there's a piece of you that always has to say, wait, there's actually kind of more to this. But it's easy to get caught up in that. Oh my gosh, that person treated you so badly. So anyway, but yeah, you can also exaggerate. Speaking of Reddit, it could also, exaggerate the situation, exaggerate the things that are happening, how frequently it's happened. The other way, we can see is people avoiding. We avoid the situations, we avoid the people, we avoid the conflict at all costs. People can, just stop showing up. Productive. If we're in a work situation, productivity declines because you're just like caught up. You're spending so much energy over here on the conflict than you are over here on the actual situation that you're trying to address. Oftentimes you're so distracted, you can be inaccurate and decision-making becomes hard, and we really fall into that competitive nature of things. So, again, there's lots of different ways that you can frame it. And I looked and looked and looked to find like, here's the official researched framework for the way what conflict is and the origins. And it's just way too complicated for that. So the things that I've presented in these slides are framings that come from a lot of different places. And they hopefully will be helpful as you think about conflict sort of moving forward. And we have two models that we're going to talk about at the end for resolving conflict. But what we'd like to do right now is we'd like to talk a little bit more about, we'd like to give you some time to talk a little bit more. I'm going to stop sharing, to talk about how you see conflict, what conflict looks like, and what the consequences are. I'm going to turn it over to Theresa to do that. And I'm going to share this PowerPoint because we can put some information in there. So Theresa.
I've already shared it, Samantha.
Oh, sorry, you're ahead of me.
That's
Awesome.
okay.
You.
Okay.
Wonderful.
So thank you, Sam, for all of that wonderful information. So now we want to give an opportunity for you to have a conversation. So Sam already shared some things around what recognizing conflict, recognizing behaviors, and some of the consequences of it. So we want to give some time for you. So I've actually created 3 rooms of 3. And if anybody wants to go to a quiet room, they're welcome to. And you're going to have 8 minutes. And if you open that slide deck that Sam and I both shared, you'll see there's 6 slides. So you'll have 2 slides for group 1, 2 slides for group 2, 2 slides for group 3. And in your conversation, if you can elect maybe one person to be a scribe as you're having this conversation, you can add what are the behaviors you see for recognizing for conflict, and then recognizing the conflict behaviors, and then another slide for the consequences of unresolved. So you can add to those 2 slides in your group, and they should be labeled room 1, group 2, group 3. So you'll fill out 2 slides.
And if you prefer not to join in on this activity, you're welcome to stay here and hang out with us.
Yes, I've also created a quiet room. So, would anyone like to be in the quiet room? Because I can reassign before I open the rooms. Okay. If at any point you would like to move to the quiet room, the law of 2 feet is open. Just come back here and you can go back. So you'll have 8 minutes, and then you'll get a warning, and you'll have 30 seconds to come back. I know it's not a ton of time, but hopefully that gives you an opportunity to start. So I'm going to open all the rooms and you'll whisk away. See you in 8 minutes.
I'm just standing behind Theresa.
Oh, you are? Okay.
I'm
Sounds good.
I feel for you all down there. You're
Well,
sandwiched between my original home and my current home.
well, I live in France,
Oh,
so most of the time I'm not in there. I'm not in
oh, so
France
you
right
have
now.
that perspective as well. Okay,
So
as being out,
yeah,
but
yeah,
connected.
different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we also had our almost far right
Yes,
get
yes.
elected too. So yes. Welcome back. Welcome back.
And I don't know if Yasser wants to hit the record button again. I'll be the
I've
reminder.
already hit it. I learned from my last faux pas, so it's all good. We are
It's
recording.
nice to see you, Maha.
Okay. So, quick, open up the floor. Anything that anyone wants to amplify from those conversations, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Sam to talk about. We have these two models that we wanted to teach you, or actually, there's three, two and a half. Would anyone like to amplify anything that came up in those conversations?
Is there anything that has come out of this that's really sort of an epiphany moment or a moment of a, oh, or anything along those lines?
Yeah, a bit like our group was talking about recognizing conflict behaviors, and it just sometimes certain behaviors people do like engage in, sometimes you don't feel they create conflict, for example, like silence or when someone doesn't really want to talk to you. But then when you think of it later on, this creates it gives the impact that this person may be stonewalling you or doesn't want to speak, and then it creates some sort of hostility within you. So sometimes the actions people do that we feel are normal, sometimes they do create conflict without us recognizing that that's the case. So
Thank you, Yasmin. Danny, I see your comment in the chat that you settled on how conflict behaviors are often consequences. Conflict feeds conflict, as seen in the escalation tornado. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We kind of spent the first couple of minutes trying to figure out how to go beyond slide 4, because slide 4 kind of already basically laid out the two sides. And we realized that they're like the relationship between the conflict behaviors. So the more you engage in conflict, the more defensive you get and use conflict behaviors as like a self-protection mechanism. And that was sort of where we settled. And then we started filling in the slides, and then we ran out of time. But I was going to add something that we didn't quite get to, but I think in order to break that conflict cycle, the person to do that, there has to be a level of vulnerability to kind of be the one who's no longer sort of defending, like engaging in that self-defense mechanism. So you have to be the one to say, okay, I'm not going to act like a jerk today, and then we'll see how you behave. So I think it takes a lot of work probably to be that person.
I love that, Danny. And there's a couple of thoughts I've had that I haven't had a chance to share in the breakout rooms. One is just a reflection on what Yasmin was saying, and wondering if there are sometimes cultural differences in the way we behave, where some behavior will be construed as passive aggressive when the person really just actually meant to be calm and things like that. And it's not just intercultural as in because we're from different cultures, but even within the same community, sometimes people behave in different ways, unintentionally harming each other, and then the assumptions make it escalate. Then the other thing that I was thinking about in terms of power differences and how the person who has more power should always be the one who decides not to be the jerk, right? Like it's just I'm just thinking about myself as a parent and how much of a jerk I am as a parent. I don't have all the power in this relationship. Why am I such a jerk sometimes? So anyway, I just had to get that off my chest.
Thanks. Maha, your comment about the intercultural differences. It also can be family differences. Like, this is how we in this family deal with conflict. This is the way conflict's been modeled here. And that can be very uncomfortable for somebody else that's over here. And you're not even aware that you're in that sort of thing. And so I do think that's a really important piece to keep in mind. And I really love the comment about the vulnerability and the question of who has the power to be vulnerable. It can be very hard to be the vulnerable one when you don't have the power or control in a particular situation, and you don't know how that's going to go. But I again also think it really does come down to you and yourself and how you're sort of approaching these. Yeah, neurodivergence. I'm glad you brought that up, Danny, as well.
Can I add something to
Sure,
this?
of course.
Because I just had it was interesting. So I'm at my parents' house, and the other night my dad asked my husband how work was going, and my husband responded, but my dad never asked me. And this has been happening for like 10 years. My dad never asked how my work is going, but he always asked my husband. And in my head, I was like, what's going on? Why is he being such a whatever, you want to fill in the blank and all this kind of stuff? And finally, yesterday, I said, I'm just going to ask him. So I said, Dad, can I share an observation with you? And he was like, yeah. And I said, well, the other night at dinner, you asked Olivier how his work was going, but you didn't ask me how my work was going. And it made me wonder, do you not think I'm working? Do you not care about my work? Do you not think it's valuable or important? And he was like, why would you think that? And he just was like, no, I just know your work is going great because I talked to your mom and you tell your mom about it and blah, 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 and I don't feel like I need to ask and you need to like, so much storytelling goes into conflict. And then that's on us to look at how are we creating the conflict ourselves by whatever we're using to fill in the blank. So I just wanted to share that as a very recent example.
So, Theresa, I'm glad you brought that up because that takes us back to sort of that CBT model. One of the things we thought about talking about here, but chose to not because it got a little too complicated and a little too much. But there is this sort of framework where you are, sort of stepping back and observing kind of, here's the situation, here's what my thoughts are, here's the story that I'm telling myself, here's how that's making me feel, and then this is how it makes me act, or how I choose to act based on those feelings. And if you can break it back, yeah, we could do one. If you break it back to the the story that I'm telling, okay, here's the situation. What are the other possible stories that could be happening here? Or asking, like, what's actually happening here? And then reframing, how, like, acknowledging how you're feeling about that. Then you can choose different actions as opposed to sort of being in this autonomic kind of like, this happened. This is how I feel. This is how I'm going to act. This is what's happening. And this is the way I'm going to respond. So I think, especially when we're talking about interpersonal behaviors or interpersonal things, taking that time to work through what's actually going on and asking for clarification can be a good way of interrupting what's happening. I think when it's a more like not interpersonal, but like an organizational question or things like that, taking the time to step back and asking for more information so that you can reframe your story or understand the story differently can be really, really helpful. We're going to jump into some other ways. We're going to jump into some other models in a second, but I think that the CBT model is a really good one. If you're interested in something like that, definitely check it out. I'll see if I can dig up some resources to send, but we kind of didn't go into that because it's a more complicated and it's a very, like, I'm not a psychologist. So like trying to introduce it makes me feel a little uncomfortable, but it is a really nice framework for sort of thinking through situations and realizing where, okay, there's a real conflict here and I have no control or power to do anything about it. Like, I'm right, but I can't do anything about it. So what do I do with that? How do I respond to that? Because then it puts the control back in your space because you're controlling your response and what you do. So with that said, and I agree. Thank you for the vulnerability, Theresa. I think if we all were a little more vulnerable, we probably the world would be a little kinder place. but that's my own opinion.
Before you go on, Sam, I just want to recognize what Veronica has said, is that we have to be very careful about who we choose to be vulnerable with, because there will be, you know, and what that relationship is and what that level of trust is, because she's saying that sometimes our vulnerability can be abused by others and taken advantage of, for sure.
I agree. I agree. That's where the like that model of thinking, and I appreciate you highlighting that because I hadn't fully read Veronica's comment at that moment. So I appreciate you pulling that out. All right, so we're going to jump into Danny. Okay, sometimes I've been thinking more about, is it more important to be right or to move towards convergent thought? Because being right can lead to conflict and break interpersonal relationships. I think there's a balance. And I think that's what we're going to talk about in this Thomas Kilmann conflict model, which is a pretty, it's a pretty well-known model. I think it depends on what your outcome and goal is. And we'll give you a chance to think about that in a second, because I'm not sure it's always, the compromising is always the right thing to do. Sometimes it depends on what the situation is. So I think it depends. Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Theresa. All right. So I'm going to share my slide again, just so you guys can see this model, because I think it's helpful to see it. But, and Theresa can probably provide us a little bit more background on Thomas Kilmann, because I think she's worked with it a little bit more than I, but this particular model it's a fairly well-known model for thinking about and moving through conflict. And so it really operates on two axes. One axis being the sort of commitment to your goal, or your level of assertiveness that you're going to display. And then on the bottom, like the level of cooperativeness that you want to be. So those two axes provide the sort of frame for this model. And back to what Danny said, that question of, you know, am I going to compromise? Am I going to try to be convergent? You know, thinking about it of like, how assertive am I in this situation and how cooperative do I want to be, sort of puts you in a different quadrant or region of this model. So assertiveness is running up and down to the left, and cooperativeness from low to high is on the bottom. And then we have different quadrants, with the center one being compromising. And it ranges around from low assertiveness, low cooperating, to avoiding, which is really separating you from whomever you're in conflict with, trying to stay back away from it. And there's some situations that makes sense in. Then we go toward accommodating, which is sort of high cooperativeness but low assertiveness. You're kind of going along. Somebody else is you're accepting what somebody else is defining or doing, and you're staying there, and you're just gonna accept and go along with it. On the high assertiveness level, you get competing, and in competing, you're not cooperating with anybody. It's really you're taking the control, you're taking the responsibility, you want your thing done. Your perspective seen, your goal is the goal that everybody should be following, but it's a very singular, uncooperative place to be. And then collaborating is kind of where you reach a place where both of you have levels of assertiveness and the levels of cooperativeness, and you're moving toward together in that sort of role. And then in the center is really that compromising, where we're agreeing that, okay, you know what? This piece of it is you, and it's different from accommodating, because it's not just going along with what somebody else is. You're also bringing yourself, part of what you're seeing is happening as well as what they're seeing. And perhaps there's something new that's happening between those two things. That's where it becomes sort of generative. It's different from collaborating, in the sense that in collaborating, both sides of the conflict are moving things forward. You're coming together to come up with a beneficial solution. But compromising is really a consensus. It's maybe not it's not necessarily everything that you would agree with, and not everything that somebody else would agree with, but it's a place that you can reach in the middle. So that's one model to sort of think about if you think about a conflict and where you are now. and where you would like to go, thinking about those different quadrants can help you think about the actions that you can take to move yourself from one place to another place. I'm really thinking about if you look, there's a little box that has a you and a them, really thinking about where you are on that. So if I'm in a competing mode, what do I need to do to shift to a collaborating mode? Or what do I need to shift to a compromising mode? And how does that happen? And there's, sometimes there are situations where, you know what, I'm going to stay in the avoiding mode because that's where I need to be for this. And that's just where that's the safest place to be. That's the best way that I can be in this particular situation. I need to avoid it. I need to walk away from it. Because I have no power or control and I can't shift it. And there's no way for me to shift it. Sometimes you're in accommodating and you're like, well, you know what? Maybe I could get to more collaborative if I'm a little more assertive. So that's sort of the Thomas Kilmann model. I think the visual is really helpful. I will throw a link out to something that explains sort of the type of avoidance or the type of behaviors that happen in each of these quadrants, and then sort of when they might be appropriate, and what the results are of those. So for later reference, if you want to come back to that, you can. And I'm going to turn it over to Theresa now to talk about a different model.
Sam, okay, I was going to say, can you just keep sharing? Actually, can you go back up one, to
Sure.
go to the Thomas Kilmann? I just wanted to make one other comment about it. For any of you who are familiar with Brene Brown's work,
Yeah.
she actually borrowed a woman named Linda Hartling's work, and she talks about what shame shields. And so if you know anything about that, then the avoiding is the pulling away, competing is moving towards, and accommodating is people pleasing. So it's other ways that we try to avoid conflict, and with conflict comes shame. So I just wanted to say that. Now we can go to the other one.
Okay.
So the other model that we wanted to share is called the Karpman drama triangle. And this is where in conflict and in any interpersonal relationship, you can end up finding yourself in one of these three roles. So the role of the persecutor is the person who doesn't seem to value your point of view, value who you are potentially, and you see them potentially as a persecutor. So this could be somebody within a work context, it could be your boss, it could be the government, it could be your child, it could be like, can't they just figure it out and stop screaming at me, right? So, and this is a lot about your mindset. Like, who do you feel like is the one that's causing this conflict? They are often the persecutor. And then you potentially could be in this role of victim. There's nothing I can do. I can't change anything. I don't have enough power. There's maybe a bit of poor me syndrome. There's a bit of potentially complaining and whinging. This is a role that my daughter loves. And then the other role is the rescuer. So within this model, the rescuer is the person who potentially comes in and wants to help the victim with the persecutor, but in doing so, they are often doing it for selfish reasons, for their own sake. They're not necessarily doing it for the victim. They're doing it because they love coming in and rescuing, and they like that role, and they get some ego, like, oh gosh, I'm such a great person because I am rescuing someone. But Karpman talks about how none of these roles are supportive, and the goal is to actually leave this entire triangle alone. But in conflict, we also need to recognize that we can move amongst any of these roles at any time. So there can be moments where we are the victim looking at a persecutor, but then we get super judgmental. And even if we're not voicing it towards the other person, in our heads, we are potentially persecuting the other person because they're not listening to us and not whatever, but then maybe we're not listening to them. So we can move around these roles quite frequently. And it's not like you are in one role 100% of the time. You can move and shift. And it could just be a moment and a mindset that you have. They can move you from victim to persecutor, or persecutor to victim, or victim to rescuer. And one of the things that often happens in conflict is we can get stuck in the victim role because we're looking for somebody to rescue us because we don't want to deal with the persecutor ourselves. And so we're hoping that somebody else will rescue us in some ways. So this is just a way, and some of it's mindset, some of it's behavioral related. So once this man Karpman developed this, there was another man who developed a different thing to amplify some of these and shift some of the mindset around them. Sam, can you shift the slide? So this is called the empowerment dynamic. So it takes the entire Cartman drama triangle and shifts it to potentially a more empowering state. So the victim becomes the creator. They are focused on their vision. They are focused on what they can do. They're taking more responsibility for the situation, for the conflict, and the desires that they want to achieve. So they're a little bit more involved. And yes, that does take vulnerability, as we talked about. The rescuer becomes the coach. So instead of jumping in and trying to save someone, they're trying to lift the person up so that they can save themselves from the conflict, so that they're a little bit more empowered in the situation. And then the persecutor turns into the challenger. So, and it's more of a focus to thinking about learning and challenging assumptions and naming things. And that goes back to like my storytelling thing. So I could, say my dad's the persecutor and I'm the victim, but I could also say my dad's challenging me. And so I had to essentially coach myself to open up this conversation with my dad and see my dad as, oh, I have to actually challenge myself. So sometimes they're actual people, but sometimes they're not actual people. So we're going to go to the next slide. And the next slide shows both of these together. So when we're involved in a conflict, it's important for us to think about, where am I stuck in this drama triangle somewhere? Who is potentially my persecutor? Am I the persecutor potentially? Can I be both the persecutor and the victim? Am I looking for somebody to rescue? Am I hoping somebody's going to rescue and maybe they're not doing it the way that I want to? And then to flip it to, can I think of myself as being more creative? Can I be more empowered in this? Who can coach me instead of who can rescue me? And can I shift my relationship to the persecutor so that it's more of a challenge as opposed to a persecution? There is a lot of power dynamics that are involved in this. So, and that's not necessarily shown in some of these slides, but I think it's important for us, and we talk about conflict, like what is our role? What can we do? And sometimes we can move ourselves out of this role of victim and stop looking at a situation as being a persecutor or a person as a persecutor, and try to shift from the drama triangle into the empowerment dynamic. So I'm going to just leave it at that. We only have 14 minutes left.
We have
Holy
14
cow,
minutes
time
and we
flies.
have like 25 minutes worth of stuff to do, but that's okay.
I know, we do. Okay, so go ahead, Sam.
Oh, I was going to say, so we're going to shift into an activity, but I think we're going to skip the conversation part of it, maybe, Theresa, or should we just shift?
Yeah, I think let's just do some self-reflection.
Okay. So what we wanted to do was give you an opportunity to go back to that conflict that you were thinking of at the beginning of this session. So go back to whatever conflict it was that you had. Choose one of these models, either the empowerment dynamic drama triangle one that's on the screen right now, or choose the Thomas Kilmann model, and think about kind of what is your end goal with this conflict. Like, what would be the resolution or the goal that you would want to get to around this? Then reflect on how you can use one of these models in order to change the dynamic for yourself. So if you're in the Kilmann, identify where you are right now. Are you in the accommodating? Are you in the competition? Are you model mode? Are you in accommodating, or are you in, collaboration? I don't think it's a conflict if you're in collaboration, but maybe. So, where are you now and where would you like to be, and what steps might you take to get there? Same thing. If you choose to use the empowerment and drama triangle model, are you currently the persecutor? Are you currently the victim? Are you currently the rescuer? What role are you playing? And what do you need? What role do you want to be playing? And what do you need to do to get there? So we'll take about 5 minutes, 4 minutes to think that through. We'll have a brief checkout and then our brief chat discussion. And then we have one final guided reflection to do.